A very good morning to you and welcome back to Business AM with me, Ondiro Ganga. Before the break, I had mentioned I'll be joined by Andrew Maubi, who's an economic analyst, but not just an economic analyst, he's also a doctor with a doctorate in finance. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for making time. Or can I call you Daktari? Great. So it's been a very interesting week.
Yes.
Very interesting events have unfolded,
All
and we
right.
want to start with Kenya gets 67.5 billion from China to finance projects.
All right.
And now this agreement was reached upon on Friday, and for Konze Data Center and Smart City project by telecommunication giant Huawei and JKIA James Gishuru Expressway. Now the loans come in form of concessional financing and public-private partnership. Let's talk about this for a minute. Kenya borrowing more. What do you make out of this, all of this?
One, citizens of Kenya should understand that first, borrowing is not bad per se, because we've had countries and countries borrow. Let me shock you today that even the US itself has lived on borrowing. Actually, its highest amount of loan comes from China.
Yeah.
That does not mean that Kenya should blindly move to borrowing from China, given that other countries have done it. And actually, even our percentage in terms of debt to GDP ratio is even way much lower than other countries that are developed. But the statistics show that countries that borrow in higher scales, sometimes are developed countries mostly. Now, when developing countries go borrowing, then it means that they need to check on their spending in terms of what this money is being used for. If the money is used for development projects solely, up to a given limit, provided it does not exceed about 64% of GDP, then that is safe for us. And provided we continue to pay for this debt's interest without necessarily having to top up or refinance, as we would call it, then we are safe to continue.
Simple project, SGR, borrowed a lot to finance it.
Yes.
They say it will take forever to service the debt.
Yes.
Is that smart borrowing?
In my view, that is only probably public opinion. But what do the figures tell us? What we should be asking this government of ours to tell us or to explain to us is, have they computed the net present value of this project? One. Two, is the payback period good enough? Is it shorter than the time that we are going to take to repay the loan? If those answers are to the affirmative, then we would really appreciate that the government is doing a good job. But these questions have not been properly responded to by the Kenyan government to its citizens.
Japan. Yes. Largest economy in the world.
Yes.
But one that is also the most indebted,
The
third
highest,
largest.
actually 234% of GDP.
Fourth in terms of purchasing power parity.
Right.
What Japan is borrowing, Kenya is equally borrowing. Why the discord?
The issue is, in terms of, we are looking at developed economy versus a developing economy. By the time we achieve the agreed, the development goals that we have set for 2030, where we need to get to, then we should really at least have a comparison. But as of now, we are very far in terms of developments, and as such, we cannot compare Japan and Kenya. That does not mean that Japan is really safe in terms of their borrowing ratios, but we must say that Kenya is way far behind than Japan, so those comparisons are not tenable. Yes.
Now, still on the SGR, it's in Naivasha, it's supposed to get to Kisumu.
Yes.
Now, the Right Honorable former Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga clearly articulated that while he's accompanying the president to China, key on his agenda would be securing a loan for the completion of the SGR, right? But when they come back, the story changes, rather, from public opinion, and the government says that was not a deal on the table that was going to be negotiated for, right?
Yeah.
Yesterday, Nzioka Waite clearly stated that Raila Amolo Odinga is Africa Union envoy infrastructure, and so he does not speak for the Jubilee administration.
Agreed.
Is the government changing the tune because they did not secure the loan, or the government is saying the truth? And how are they going? Was it a big miss? Is China reading mistakes from lending its money to Kenya? That's why it refused to give Kenya the loan.
First, I do not really think that China is reading mistakes, because we have very serious economists in this country. And rarely would the president, especially for borrowing of such magnitude, go against the word of chief economists in this country. So my view is that China has not read mischief. Then number two, question is, let me take you back a bit. Recently, the president gave land to the Ugandan government, specifically to Museveni and President Museveni, and he said that he's going to help them with land as they set up the dry port, right? So my question is, do we know the deal between Museveni and Kenya to details? If we do, or if we did, then we would answer differently. But now that we do not know, the revamping of the current MGR, right, from Naivasha to Kisumu, would have been an agreement that was struck between Museveni and Kenya, in my view. Exactly,
the way Isaka-Kigali Railway was done between Rwanda and Tanzania.
And my question has been, we have the old railways, and they are operational. Must we really, fully, make our rails to be SGR gauge, right? So my view is that we still are on course in terms of our development, and we will still have our goods delivered, and the economy will still grow, provided that the current MGR does not break down. That is why they've allocated 40B to help revamp this particular gauge.
Well, gentlemen, hold on to that thought. We'll come to that story.
Yes.
But you at home who's watching can talk to us at Metropol TV is our handle on all social media platforms. Dr. What's your handle, Twitter?
At Maubi Andrew.
Do you agree with Dr. or do you have conflicting views? Talk to us. Hashtag Business AM. Let's move on to the next story. And is cash rule to increase lending to SMEs? That is from banks. Now, banks reacting to the caps law have gone on a go-slow for SMEs in the country. Now, when the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics released its 2019 economic survey, the finance sector had really suffered a go-slow. Banks are not lending out their money to the private sector and equally to the government. And when CS Rotich spoke, he categorically said, we need to relook the interest capping bill. What's your take, gentlemen?
Let me first go back to the capping of interest rates in Kenya. We have advised the government before, chief economists have advised, but because of politics, the government chose to go ahead and implement the cap on lending rates. But this, as was the case, would not have been tenable for long. That is why Treasury has seen it fit to come back and say, we are going to guarantee. The aspect of really the banks charging high rates. As you borrow, as a citizen or a small business, your risk level must always be monitored. If your risk is high, then your lending rate is going to be high. So now that the government has realized their mistake, then they have come down through Treasury and they're saying that we're going to guarantee. Once we guarantee, then the current lending rates. But that does not stop the government from utilizing the 1-year window within which the bank should really, or the government should closely monitor the lending rates, and as such maybe recommend the repealing of this law or otherwise, or suggest things that are tenable. So meanwhile, as it is good for the government to have come forth and said that we will guarantee. But now operationally, how are we going to ensure complete and full implementation for the banks? I feel if the banks that get a guarantee that their risk levels are going to be low, then they're going to agree to this particular proposal. However, we should ask ourselves, this risk aspect also, from the banking point of view, you remember last year, we came up, or the IFRS 9 has come into implementation, despite the Central Bank of Kenya having issued, a 5-year term within which the bank should comply. Then also we should also take into account all these aspects as we look at this subject. Yes. Thank
you very much. Now, let's take a look at another story, just going back to the story that we were talking about, SGR. SGR Naivasha Kisumu halt, compensation shock for crafty Kenyans. Now, it is bitter saliva for speculators who bought property worth billions of shillings along the route eyeing for compensation. Now, in areas like Suswa, Narok, Bomet, where 50 by 100 plots go for 300 shillings, the price skyrocketed to like 300,000 rather. The price skyrocketed to 2.5 million, 3 million. The people who've bought property worth 1 billion, worth 120 billion in anticipation. And then we go back to the conversation where there's no 381 billion to take the SGR through that route. And now we have to revamp the old railway. Let's start from the very basic. Was the SGR necessary, or we could have revamped the old railway rather?
In my own view, like I said earlier, the government should have looked at, we made an investment, albeit a long time ago, right? In terms of the MGR. But now we have the SGR.
Yeah.
We should have looked at, how can we improve the current MGR into a level that we can have limited interruptions in terms of flow of service. But now here we are. We look at, the investments that were made by Kenyans out of speculation. In finance, there is what we call the EMH, which is the efficient markets hypothesis. Now, this says that, you cannot be able to beat the market. Now, the information is out here to the citizens that the SGR is no longer tenable. But still, the MGR is going to get operational and, continuously work out. I know the effect of it in the market is that the prices are going to go down.
Yes.
If the individual investors knew that the SGR was not to be a reality,
yeah,
and they sold their property last week, in terms of their compensation, it should have been higher compared to now. But it may not really necessarily go, lower than the price that for which it was bought.
Yeah.
Because properties always will have their prices higher. Because one, we will be having a property in terms of the project that will be ongoing, in terms of now MGR and not SGR, right? But going forward, when we look at this, like now you've rightly asked, are these Kenyans, I can see even from the headline, the shock of crafty Kenyans,
yes,
right?
But are they really crafty, or they're just smart businessmen?
They're not crafty, they're smart. Because what we should look at, what drives prices of property? One, developments. Two, demand and supply. Simple economics, right? But now we cannot call them crafty. We can only call them smart businessmen. And even if we say that the policies of government, would need to be looked into, we would look at, I think in my own view, the government's policies are not, in terms of compensation, are not a problem.
No, let's talk about government policies for a minute.
Yes.
Swazuri had that problem when he was in charge of the lands docket.
Yes.
And compensation has always driven the cost of projects in this country high, because if the government was to buy the intended plot in Suso, it would have bought it for 300,000 Kenya shillings, hypothetically. But now if someone has bought it at 2.5 million, it means common sense would say they'll sell it at least 4 million Kenya shillings to the government, right? Doesn't that drive the cost of infrastructural projects high? Yet Kenya's economy majorly is infrastructure driven.
The first thing that I want to mention here today is that what drives the value of property, like I said, demand and supply. Two, the same value that the government will contract will come down and monitor or look at the prices around. And because of demand and supply, and the developments that are meant to come up, of course they will value the property higher. But the question is, does corruption have a role to play in terms of this skyrocketing costs of projects in this country? If it does, because if a valuer comes and gives this value, and then we find out that the government is compensating at a higher value than what the valuer that was contracted gave, then we are doing it wrongly. But if we are giving at the value that the valuer really gave, then we are doing it correctly.
Now, there are people who are smiling, particularly those who are along the old railway line.
Yes.
What should these people expect once the 40 billion project has already been completed? And what does this mean for a city like Kisumu? I've spoken to Governor Anyang' Nyong'o before, and he's a very optimistic gentleman. Right. He hopes the airport will pick up and the infrastructural projects that he's doing. How will the SGR play into injecting thrive in the Kisumu economy?
Now, the upgrade of the current MGR that we already have would be really a blessing in disguise.
Yeah.
Now, for the investors that are along the MGR, of course they will be smiling, because the operations of the MGR would mean really livelihood for them. Yeah. Now, for a city like Kisumu, it will be a good thing. And of course, the environs, Kisumu and the environs, like all areas in Nyanza, because we will be having continuous flow of goods from the port of Mombasa down to Kisumu. And of course, this extension later, we are being told, is going to go all the way to Busia and across the border. Yes, that would be a good thing for the country.
Okay, now, the people who bought land at those exorbitant prices, can they sue the government?
No, they can't. What is the basis of the suing the government? Because one, you buy in speculation. The government did not enter into any contract. So you cannot purport to indicate that, you know, they have any right to sue the government.
So high risk, high return, but you can easily get banned.
Yes, yes. And of course, if you do not take risk in this country, you can never make money. And that is a simple finance concept. Yeah.
High risk, high return. But in this case, high risk, bitter saliva to swallow. Now let's shift gears and take a look at the education sector. This has been a very interesting sector, and we were just talking about it even before we came on air. We've seen different cabinet secretaries come and go. Matiang'i came with the iron fist and tried to streamline systems. And an equally competent gentleman, judging from his track record, has come to take leadership, and that's Professor George Magoha. And the government said that it streamlined the school fees structure across the whole country so as to ensure its 100% transition is attainable. However, same old school fees surprise. Parents are being hit by surprise school fees from nowhere for extracurricular activity. For example, 5,000, 2,000, 3,000 per term basis. So what do we make out of all this? Is the old habit catching up with us because the iron fist that had streamlined it is out of office?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think the old habits are coming back because one, we have policies in place, some of which were instigated by the former CS, Dr. Fred Matiang'i. But now, question is, as government, we are saying we are implementing free education. Have we financed it sufficiently? That should be the question. Because the operational costs in these schools are quite high. Have they been factored into the school fees or the part of financing from the government? That should be the question, really. And if we say that the schools are caught in the wrong side of the law, do we have prosecutions going on? I'm not aware of any, unless you can tell me of any prosecution against a principal who has raised fees. Because if all these costs have not been factored into the compensation that the schools get, and of course, even judging from the triple A accounting concept, then we should be saying that the government should meet all these costs, including the cost of watchman, the cost of upgrading schools, because sometimes we want to have 100% transition, but the facilities are constrained. Do we have the development, compensation from government to these schools to help them come with, new classrooms and things like those? That is why sometimes the board of management of schools and the principal make decisions and say, let's help or let's get some money from the parents so that we upgrade the schools. So I cannot really overly wrong the school heads in terms of the school fees that is being levied over and above what the government really pays, but now the buck stops with the government, quite specifically to say.
Staying with the education sector, Standard 3 pupils are set to do their first ever national examination under the competence-based curriculum. CBC. What's your take, Dr.?
In my view, it's a good thing to start, checking on how far we are in terms of implementation of the CBC, because unless we check out, right, and know the progress, then because we are on trial still, we are not yet fully into the full implementation of this curriculum, new curriculum. So it will be interesting to observe and see what happens, especially after this, of course, inaugural test that is coming. Yes.
Now, finally, with the education sector, there has been push and pull, particularly with the competence-based curriculum, with one sector saying teachers are not ready, and it's a project by a particular Western country to kind of disrupt the Kenyan education system. But some are saying this is the answer to the future economic needs of this country. Your 2 cents, Dr.
My view really is, it is not, the current position is not new. Because change always has been, a source of conflict. Whenever there's change introduction, people oppose it. But before we realize the full benefits, because if you're being told that your child, who cannot make it in terms of real academics, can do something else, that's a good thing. Why would we push, for example, math that is revered by some people, right? Why would we push it down to throats of those that cannot really make it there? So let's allow every pupil a chance to develop in terms of what they're talented in. So in my own view, it serves nobody. It serves no single citizen to oppose the current curriculum, given the benefits that have been outlined.
Okay.
If the benefits were not really explained to us, then we would join hands and oppose it. But the benefits have been, outlined, and they're immense. So we would really observe and see what happens. Now, in terms of involvement, maybe we need to involve the stakeholders more. That is what the government should really zero in on. Otherwise, this opposition will continue. But we're almost there.
Yeah.
And we really look forward to the full implementation of this curriculum. Yes.
That is Dr. Maubi's take. What's your take? Hashtag Business AM. The handle is at Metropol TV at Dr. Andrew Maubi.
Maubi Andrew.
Maubi Andrew on
Yes.
Twitter. Do you think that the opposition of the curriculum, competence-based curriculum, is just for the sake of opposition, or you support it because you believe that it's the answer to the economic needs of this country? Finally, Dr. Ri, as we wind up Metropol Review today,
Yes.
last week was a good week. And going back to China, Kenya sealed a 1.4 billion deal of avocados. Selling it will be the first Pan-African country to be selling to that huge market.
Right.
What does that mean for avocado farmers in the Kenyan market?
Those are good news for the country in terms of the avocado farmers, because for a long time. But now production needs to be checked, because once a deal has been signed, we shouldn't be a letdown to the export market, because that's an inaugural program that needs to be supported. So the farmers need to also up their game, probably come up with good production methodologies that will ease and enlarge or increase production, so that we are able to consistently meet our supply needs, so that we probably become at some point a net exporter, not importer, as a dream. Yes.
And they say exports are one of the fastest way,
of course,
towards servicing the loans and reducing the rate of debt to the GDP.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ri. We appreciate you taking your time and coming to put some of these economic topics into perspective. Looking forward to having you some other time.
Thank you. Soon.
There you have it from Dr. Ri. We still say the hashtag Business AM. Talk to us. We've done an array of stories, from the SGR being halted and the government choosing to revamp the old route, the education sector, the 1.4 billion avocado deal. So talk to us and tell us what are your thoughts on those topics. The hashtag once again is Business AM at Metropol TV. We take a short commercial break, but when we come back, so much more lined up for you. You do not want to miss that. Stay with Metropol TV.